All right, well, here we go. We're going to plan a nice little map for us, an adventure path, as we normally call them, or an adventure, or whatever you want to refer to this. Fantasy Grounds make these up into modules. So we're going to begin with the basic concept is to create a story page that's going to include all these elements. And then as we make the pages, we're going to put them into a different module that you'll see in the library. So you'll see I've already got some things done on this particular area, which two of these have already been made before, and we're going to make a new one right now. So you should be able to see the entire creation process. So I'm going to add a new line. We're going to come back here. This is the fundamental, what is this going to be about? This helps me break these up. These are all shorter dungeons, things that I've made to either fill in or drop in gaps or plug for personal storylines at times. So this is what this one's going to be about. When we finish up, we'll kind of move that into that attachment. So there's one place to grab all this stuff. It looks like we're going to drop this in to 1.03. That's going to be what everything's going to be labeled under this. Now I just do this for organizational purposes. So everything I build for this one is going to fall under this 1.03. And then I will even list them inside here, 1 through 9 or so. We'll see how it goes. But that's going to help me keep track of this. I lay these out in the same manner. There's always the beginning hook. So for this one, we're just going to say that we have some townfolk complaining about different sounds or even, different problems. And then that'll be the players coming to research. So sometimes I make it more direct, a person they know, a town guard or soldier or somebody that they've been familiar with, come directly to the players and bug them about it. Once they decide to take on the hook, then the rest of this is going to build from that scenario, right? So beginning with a quest, this is just to remind them. If you go back to the video about the player sheet, I like to remind them what are we currently doing, and this is the quest that they're going to be on. I often put somewhat vague or silly remarks about stuff about the quest that should apply to the quest, but once they have this kind of quest thing, we can set in a CR and XP. CR is not totally necessary for quests, but it does help set an XP level. Now, when we drop this in, this will be what I can put on their player sheet and give to the players so they can see, this is the quest related to this function. And then at that point, we need maps. So I'm going to make some maps, and then we're going to input them into this. Now, I've already made maps on some previous videos, so we're going to go and drop some of those maps in. But there's two other things we're going to do here. I like this sheet to define for us what exactly is going on. So this section here, the top part is the hook, and this middle segment is okay, what is actually happening versus necessarily what the hook is. And this particular one is going to be about cultists in tunnels, as the name indicates. And at that point, we can also write a conclusion. Now, the conclusion could be a bunch of things, right? So I already have an idea of what this conclusion is going to be, but we'll get to the conclusion later after we throw some stuff in. We are then going to list down the parts of the story straight down this sheet. So this can be the sheet, like as the Dungeon Master, you can go drag the sheet down to the bottom of your bar, and you can just come back to the one sheet and catch through everything. Now let's drag some maps in. So these are the maps that I made on another stream. And you can watch those to see how I made the maps. We're going to drag these maps into here. This is where the players are going to start. They're actually going to come to this map. I like there to be multiple scenarios here. This is the second map. We're going to link these two together really quick. This is how they get to the sewers from the city streets, and this is how they get to the sewers from the city streets, right? So now you can jump back and forth between the maps. These are the two map locations that we're going to use for this short story, right? And we want to begin with this map. And the reason we want to do that is we want to allow the players to see that this is a group who is more prepared, right? They're not just a bunch of people occupying a tunnel, right? Like they know a little bit about what they're doing. We're going to cover up the encounter here. So the players are going to start from up here and they're going to come down. As they come down, we're going to have somebody watching out for the players. So this is be a level of challenge, a level of whether or not they know how to use their abilities or if they're paying attention to that sort of thing. But they'll alert the people to the player's proximity, and they're going to go around they're going to be directed to go around. The players may figure out that they can come at this from another area. So let's hide it. This is an encounter city street. This is just city streets, right? I often label my maps in that sort of sequential pattern too. We can see if the grid's good. Grid is kind of default set to about 50 pixels. I always fit my maps to rounded pixels for grid purposes. I don't know if you do. We can turn it on, check, see, all right, well, this looks decent to me, right? We want to give them some room to move around. We want this to be somewhat realistic in size nature. So that grid's fine. At that point, we're kind of done with setting up the map itself. I would add terrain elements. I'm not necessarily going to do that because you might be using classics instead of Unity. But at this point, everything is available to both classic and Unity. But personally, I will set up some line of sight on the roofs, right? It'll allow them to see across them, and I wouldn't set them up as walls, right? Because if you set them up as walls, then that's not it. Now, the story element of this area, all right? So, and I set this up for basically each time the players are going to run into a scene, we will set up a story element, and then we'll keep track of the story elements here in the overall sheet, all right? This keeps it so I minimize the number of sheets on my sheet, but I can have quick access to all this stuff. Throwing this sheet onto the map here will make it so when we open the map, we'll have links to everything that we need to from the map, okay? I like to begin with some sort of description, even when I talk, and I clearly talk. So when I'm talking to the players, I will often even be saying things, not necessarily in descriptions I write, but I take a moment to write descriptions. These allow players to have something to look at and reference, especially because sometimes I'll seed little bits of information into the write-up, and they might use those bits of information. This also allows people who are note takers to just drag the description out of the chat window and throw it into their own logs, so they have exactly what was sent to them there. But since I bring this up, I like to give that description. Now, when you click the description, that gives you a moment to set some other stuff up, right? You can be chatting about what they see or what's occurring while the description's up, and now you've got some player interaction as they're discussing what's happening around them. And then there will be a phrase here to set up the scene, like what is this scene about? And this particular scene is about the plainclothes cultist, right? This is about the lookout. So there's a lookout. They're going to be looking for people with weapons, guards, and armor, and they're looking for people who are coming for them, all right? So this is you're fighting intelligent enemies, all right? So the players may or may not see this individual, and they may or may not stop, you know, the warning system. But the intention of the cultists is to go warn their leaders that somebody's coming and to have them as prepared as possible to fight off the players. Now, what is this encounter going to look like? We got to pick some guys. I love throwing civilians on a battlefield. I know that's rude of me. So we'll grab one of I have these pre-built kind of groups. We'll look for one that looks pretty good, and, you know, the small human gathering is fine. So I'll throw that into, I like to move all of the encounters into their own instance here. And you'll see that's for map placement purposes. So we'll very specifically label this for this map. And then once we throw them on the map, they'll disappear when we close out the window. But you don't have to include these people into the experience windows, right? So you want your bad guys and your normals to be in different windows. But let's have a couple of people chatting outside a building, just like the description said. We'll have a few people just coming out, maybe somebody setting up the market, also like the description said. So all this jives with what we've already told them, but it also means they can't just go around fireballing. Well, I mean, they can, but it gives them more to think about, more to move about, and they might need to, you know, move to stop the cultists from attacking somebody. Now we need some cultists. All right, not not a ton, right? Like there's going to be a few people out here, so I'm going to delete a bunch of these people off of this encounter. But we do want to plainclothes, right? And all these people are normal civilians, so we will plainclothes one of these cultists here, and then we only want a couple cultists outside. So let's go find a plainclothes cultist. I'll probably just have to drag him out from the NPCs, but I wanted to see if I actually had a plainclothes cultist encounter already, but it doesn't look like I do. So, all right. Well, we're just going to have to delete some of these guys because the purpose of this is a warning system. This isn't the fight to stop the players. So the Cultist Lookout, these are the ones above. So we'll do that. But we'll get rid of the commoners. We don't need them. We don't need the fanatic. The fanatic's a big one, and we'll have 3 cultists total. But like I said, we want the lookout to be something indistinguishable from the normal civilians. So I have some pre-built. They look like civilian tokens, and we'll get rid of one of them. Now the players are going to know he's a bad guy as soon as the fight starts, because he's going to fight like a cultist, and I'll throw him on the bad guy side. But we'll lay him out at like normal for now. So when we load up the map, the players will come down and they'll just all see all these civilians. They won't know that this guy's a cultist. And then we'll hide the cultists over here. And we'll keep them hidden until the players come over here to interact. So, but he's the bad guy cultist. Okay, so he'll let them know, and then one of them will take off for the tunnel, right? Like that is the purpose of this warning system. Now, when we get into how many players you have, how do you change the CRs and stuff like that, like, I mean, we'll get into that. But these 2 things, so you'll tell them the description, then you can come into the counter, you can click load on both. Now everybody's on the map. And then the cultist lookouts, the key here is that one of these cultists is going to run into the tunnel and give advanced warning. So the players are going to have to deal with that in some way. So if they figure out what's happening very quickly, they might have a spell or an item or an ability to stop them from going and doing the warning. Now, things aren't going to change obnoxiously, but that's the Dungeon Master secret, right? So we can actually use a early warning system to reduce CRs if we need to. And I know some of you who are more experienced know exactly what I'm talking about. I can have the guy run out of the room to go warn the others. And then when you meet back up, you see, you know, the group of bad guys, except for I didn't add an extra one. So here's the checks. This is are the players going to notice, right? So you have the floor perception checks. And if somebody's already got a floor perception check that's greater than, greater than their normal stealth level, then hey, you got it. If you have some super sneaky guys that you always have heading forward, the front, maybe the lookout doesn't notice. And if you use the right investigation or insight, you might notice that, hey, it's very abnormal that this guy's out here sitting around like this. It's definitely a lookout, right? So I'd let people with those types of backgrounds maybe have a little bit of knowledge where like it's a little strange that he's hanging out in this alleyway. But his purpose is to get one of the cultists into the tunnel. And if the players go and attack the other cultist who is now alone, he'll jump into the fray, right? They're going to deal with 2 cultists, but one of the cultists will drop into the tunnel. All right, so this is the city street encounter, right? So this will immediately set a tone that there's not just a bunch of rats, right? There's not just a bunch of normal things in there. We got to deal with these people who are thinking about stuff. So here we are in the sewers when they drop in. Now, from here, this is the city streets. We would drag that into that list view. So that's the first scene. The second scene is going to be met here when we come into the sewers. And so what we'll do is we'll set up the arrival scene after we make this map. Okay, so we'll hide it again. It's not an encounter with an altar. It's now just the sewers, right? So that keeps the players from seeing that stuff. The grid setup's okay on the 50 pixels. There's some sizes. I want you to normally be able to stand inside of the square to be on the platform. And it looks like we've got some wiggle room to squeeze over to the left to line up So right here, what we'll do is we'll squeeze the blocks over to the left a little bit, and then by doing that, we should basically just give a more even footing on the other tiles. And you'll see it come around to this other side. Now they can walk all the way around to this. It's a little, I guess, secret, right? Like, I'm not saying that the tiles that the players aren't necessarily going to use are less important, but I am saying the tiles on a map that the players really won't be walking on are less important. I'm saying that. So it's something you should just keep in mind. You don't actually need to treat the whole map like it needs to fit up perfectly. You just need to make sure your players are going to be able to use the map the way it is. Also, I could have just built this with the grid on. I didn't do that. And then it would obviously line up perfectly with the grid. So, all right, so here we are. We know that that's where they're coming down. We know the altar is going to be the end destination. That's where the boss is, all right? And these are all, it's a shorter scenario. You should be able to go through this in a single night. But let's bring up the dropping into the sewers, right? So this is scene 2, right? So they got the mission in the hook. Scene 1 is them entering the tunnels. Scene 2 is now going to be them coming down into the tunnels. I could have just made this not sewers. We could have just made this some sort of underground tunnel. Could even drop into a labyrinth or something, depending on what you want. Let's give them a beginning description, something to set the mood, something to set the tone. And then once we do that, we can set up the motives. So in this particular case, we want them to know that, hey, there's a lot more movement here than normal. So we're going to present some facts to them that the words are hard. We're going to present to them some facts here that the ladder itself seems to be fairly used, which is not what you would expect based off of the conditions of these tunnels. These tunnels are not intended to be inhabited or traversed regularly, right? Like they're just here to filter. So since there's regular movement on this ladder poses a much different look than the rest of the tunnel, right? That should lead them into the fact that the cultists are using this to come in and out a lot. Now, the other part here is we're going to give them a small tidbit. This is with the tidbit about I was talking about, like them maybe getting some evidence of stuff, is that there are some other things down here. And it wasn't something that was necessarily known. There are bits and hints as we go through here, but there's some undead. And that's what we're going to list out here. The cultists obviously have been raising some of this undead, not just to defend the area, but to eventually amass enough of them to attack the city above. All right, so that's what the cultists have been doing down here. So as we let them know that, it adds a small other element to this. So the chase can continue or the chase can begin here. If they were able to hold off the people upstairs, and they come down here, as soon as they come down here, there's going to be some more cultists that wait. And one of them is going to take off running. Now, it could be that that's the same guy. The same guy from above continues running towards the leader as the second cultist stands fast to try and hold off the players to give their boss a warning, right? Otherwise, the undead around here acts as the defense. The distances are a little here, there. Like, we can decide these a bit. So I like the idea that the undead knows who these cultists are, not like they recognize their faces, but maybe it's the symbols they're wearing. So if you were to do that and say there's a necklace that's telling the undead who the cultists are, well then, you know, reward players for maybe figuring that out and wearing one. So the same as the cultists above, I'm just going to clear this to the cultists below. We're going to get rid of the plainclothes guy, right? Because there's not a lookout up here. But 2 cultists are what we're aiming at. And that's where we can either have one of them continue the chase. See, they're all still there. We can have one of them continue the chase, or we can have one of them begin running. I don't know why I'm getting stuck on this. But the 2 of them will be just off from the ladder. So again, they're going to see somebody coming down the ladder, and one of them's immediately going to make a run for it. At this point, the players are definitely going to know, okay, these guys are looking for what's up, right? Like, it wasn't like above that they got surprised. This is the intended behavior of these guys. And one of them's going to run across, the other one's going to try to defend. The one that's defending will utilize the undead around him to try and slow the players down too. So we need some undead. Now the question is, do we overwhelm them? And the answer is always yes, by the way. The answer is always yes. You overwhelm the players. So here's a nice zombie horde. We'll go ahead and do that. With the boss being some CR2s, we're looking to keep it into a multiple encounter. Like it's set up to have like 6 encounters, and we're not obviously not going that far. We're probably going to hit about 3 or 4 on this little run, depending on how many breaks they have in fighting these guys. Skeletons have bows, and I like to set up these synergies, you making the players decide to cross the water. They can jump across the water to get to this guy, potentially start getting swept into the funnel a ways down, or they can run to the bridge to get this guy. Again, let's throw them off track, right? Like have this guy picking at them from across the way, and they have to backtrack a bit to get this guy. They got to decide if it's worth it. We can have the zombies in locations to back them up, right dead in their way. So like a cultist is going to run right by this zombie. And then we can have some cultists defending the other bridges, and a red herring zombie-ish, right? Like he's going to come in to back up. If somebody gets laid up there, a zombie can come down and fight from the other side. But we don't want to directly tell them exactly where they need to go. Now, when we're using the line of sight in Fog of War, we're only going to reveal what they see. So the players aren't going to know if they need to go up or down, right? Now, we know where they're going, but they don't know where they're going. Now, this is what these guys are doing. We can set up hazards on this sheet, which we will, but we'll come back to it. All right. So there's some extra hazards that we can throw in here for them. But now we've got the story sheet onto the sewers. There's one more scene we have to set up, right? And that scene's down here in the Cultist Layer. So the boss has been warned by now. Somebody's coming down here, or the sounds of battle in the tunnel have alerted him, and now he is going to be in wait for whoever's coming, right? Now he has a few buddies with him, which is going to help him to fight. Let's give them the idea that these guys have been down here for a little bit and what they did, right? Like they chiseled out a part of the wall and have kind of dug themselves in. We want to set the story element up. If we want the description to come at them before they arrive, we need to make sure it prompts us to see it before they arrive. So we like to include the story element before they reach where it should be clicked, right? And then now we can create the, hey, you know, the walls have been disrupted. They have had supplies down here. And that means, you know, they've been here for a little while. They've spent some time working on this. And then, you know, that lets them know this is what these cultists have been up to. They've been down here chipping away, building up a force, and they've set themselves up a layer. All right. So now the thing that these guys are doing is possibly abducting bodies, maybe taking villagers, or they could just, you know, be raiding the local graveyard. But they're getting bodies somehow, and they're bringing them back to life. And then they're using these guys as both a defense right now, but then primarily they were trying to build up enough force to go take up the city overhead. I don't know what city you're going to put this in. So if it's a big city, then this may not seem like a very sizable force, and maybe this is really early in their operations. But we'll talk about the conclusion potential later. So, but inside here we have a few of the actual fanatics that are ready to go. I normally base everything off of around a four-person party. That seems to be the gist. So every now and then, even when the party drops to 3 players at times, 3 players isn't crazy. You do need to watch the action economy a bit in 5th edition. But dropping players down to 3, they still have a pretty sturdy nature. Now, this could be a screw situation. I don't know if I'm allowed to say the Colville thing, but the Colville screw, right? So if the players have chased this guy all the way from the top to the bottom, they may have been collecting enemies the whole time. Is that a problem? Yeah. So when they come to this fight down here, if they come to this fight and they haven't cleared out any of the undead, which should be unlikely because we put them in their path. If they haven't cleared out any of the undead, I would have the undead trickle in, right? Like the first round, the closest zombies arrive. The next round, maybe some more zombies arrive. Like, give them a fighting chance. Because if they all just show up all at one time, then you're going to really see what I mean by the action economy will decimate. So we're going to clear out one of the cultists because we're looking to keep this at around, you know, we want the levels to be somewhere between 2 and 4 right now. But these cultist fanatics are a bit tougher. They've got some spell casting. And the skeletons, we're going to use both sides of the skeletons this time, right? So the fanatics themselves are okay in the melee edge, but we're going to give them a skeleton to hold up the players from just getting straight to them, and then one of them in the back, right? So give them an archer that they have to deal with. And then the fanatics can use their spells to either hinder or boost them. All right, so here's the Cultist Layer. And now that we've got the Cultist Layer down, I mean, clearly there needs to be the finale. All right, so I think that's all of the segments we're going to do, just like 3 different segments. So what were they doing down here, right? And what happens when we decide to disrupt their plans? These are great questions. So with the ritual being interrupted, we can say, okay, the players stop this cult. Maybe not. Maybe this wasn't the only cultist cell down here, right? And if this is a big city, maybe this was just one very small chunk of a very large operation. Maybe there's all sorts of tunnels and locations around the city that are doing this, and they've merely stumbled upon this, right? And we leave some prompts around here, like there's like a journal, so I have the potential to feed story into the players from the journal, and then we also have the skull itself, like what does the skull do, right? And I don't have a total guess. I mean, I know what I'll probably do. I'll probably have it explode, and it'll probably hurt everyone nearby. Might even drop someone who was eagerly trying to loot, because that's fun. But once it blows up, I'll probably have some ambiguous figure, some shade, you know, tell them that they can't stop what's coming, and you know, and then it'll disappear. Maybe they'll encounter the shade a few times with the cultists, and that will build up the scene where they get a fight the guy who's doing this behind the scenes. All right, so they need loot. All right, and I have loot tables built into this, and anyone who owns the Dungeon Master's Guide has loot tables. I don't always follow these. I roll them as treasure hoards so that they don't feel compelled to loot the bad guys all the time. Roll up a couple of these and see what we get. Oh, man. I guess I just don't like low level loot. All right, so they've got some potions. We'll relabel this again to fit the theme. This continues telling us exactly, you know, where this stuff is. So this will be the extra items they can find in this room. I have some stuff set up for purses. All right, there are some people who really like to check the bodies. So I just have some default check the body lists, like, you know, like commoner items, you know, and I don't mind. I'll hand you the wooden spoon on a string and this man's 3 copper pieces if you really want. So so I'm not going to do those loots, but this is the loot that they earn for actually beating the cultist down here. So now we have these 3 scenes, and now we can kind of fix this sheet here. So we were deciding the conclusion of this. In here, I like to leave a couple different options because I don't actually know who's going to be playing this right now. So let's finish this sheet. We're going to drag the Cultist Tunnels is what this place is called. And then we're just going to go ahead and drag the story elements over into this. And as we drag the story elements over into this, everything will be encapsulated on this one sheet. So, and then we take this sheet and we'll come up with a conclusion, and then we'll drop this sheet into the main sheet, and you'll see what I did there. Main sheet. We're not sailing. But in conclusion, was it the only cell, right? Like, this is one of the discussions we were just having, right? So they could have been just one of many cells. This could be a smaller cell of a much bigger cell, or perhaps that this is only guys, right? And then maybe the players found something that leads them to the next location here. That could have been on one of the fanatics, or it could have been something that the shade told them from the now shattered skull, right? And where do they go further into the city? Do they go outside the city, right? Like maybe this is now is like, okay, we need to go to the graveyard because somebody's supplying the bodies, right? So now we've got all this undead out here, and there's a bunch of, this is what I meant by like we can set up different challenges. So you're down in the sewer. There's different areas and locations out here. This is another one of those things. Players are going to do this. We actually set it up by putting a skeleton on the other side of the water. You should know what happens if they fall into the water because they're going to try, right? So first thing is, how far is it to jump? It's 10 feet, but we're going to say the surfaces are slick. And I think I'm going to be annoying and just make all the DCs 15 because that's like a really generic DC, right? So jumping the tunnels, how hard is it? Well, it's strength, right? Maybe, and then I like adding in, what I believe to be their usage. So we'll say DC 15 strength, and then I just say, okay, athletics, right? Now someone could argue something else. I allow my players to argue. So if they want to be like, no, I want to do this thing, but I want to use, like, as long as it's good, then sure. All right, so balancing on the debris, jumping the area, swimming out of the water, right? Because if you're jumping, somebody's gonna fall because that happens. So how tough is it to get out of the water, right? And now you could really nitpick this if you want to turn it into more gritty or more survival. Like you can throw things in there and be like, all right, like, going prone means that you might get exposed to a disease. Swallowing water, you could drown, but I'm not going to do that. So, all right, but here's my master list. So I have this 1.0 table of contents kind of thing. Now we can just drag this and throw it into the tunnel here. And now we have this, right? So now I can just go to the one page and all my things are there. We're going to export. So exporting into the module is how it becomes its own little instance. I normally, on the right side, I normally have just the elements that I need to put in here. So I'll have a list of the elements that I used, and then I know exactly which ones to click here. You can just click something like select all, and that's fine. Totally fine. It'll only export what you have. But sometimes when you're fiddling stuff, like sometimes I create a character so that I can mess around with it, and then you just exported that character into the module, and I find that to be annoying. I always double up file name and name, right, so that it's the same. You can choose a thumbnail of your own. It's just a little picture. I do that, but once you export, you're done.